Pinus albicaulis, whose many common names include whitebark pine, white pine, pitch pine, scrub pine, and creeping pine, grows in the mountains of the western United States and Canada, specifically the subalpine areas of the Sierra Nevada, the Cascade Range, the Pacific Coast Ranges, and the Rocky Mountains from Wyoming northwards. It shares the common name creeping pine with several other creeping pine plants. The whitebark pine is typically the highest elevation pine tree of these mountains, marking the tree line. Thus, it is often found as krummholz, trees dwarfed by exposure and growing close to the ground. In more favorable conditions, trees may grow to up to 29 meters in height. Characteristics: whitebark pine is a member of the white pine group Pinus, subgenus Strobus, section Strobus, and like all members of that group, the leaves are in fascicles of 5, with a deciduous sheath. This distinguishes whitebark pine and relatives from the lodgepole pine, with 2 needles per fascicle, and ponderosa pine and Jeffrey pine, which both have 3 per fascicle. These 3 all also have a persistent sheath at the base of each fascicle, distinguishing whitebark pine from the related limber pine. Also, a white pine is much more difficult and needs seed or pollen cones. In Pinus albicaulis, the cones are 4 to 7 centimeters long, dark purple when immature, and do not open on drying, but the scales easily break when they are removed by Clark's nutcracker to harvest the seeds. Rarely are there intact old cones under them. Its pollen cones are scarlet. In Pinus flexilis, the cones are 6 to 12 centimeters long, green when immature, and open to release the seeds. The scales are not fragile. Usually there are intact old cones under them. The pollen cones are yellow. Whitebark pine can also be hard to distinguish from western white pine in the absence of cones. However, whitebark pine needles are entire, whereas western white pine needles are finely serrated. Whitebark pine needles are also usually shorter, 4 to 7 centimeters long, overlapping in size with the larger 5 to 10 centimeters needles of the western white pine. Source of food: the whitebark pine is an important source of food for many granivorous birds and small mammals, including most importantly the Clark's nutcracker, the major seed disperser of the pine. Clark's nutcrackers each cache about 30,000 to 100,000 each year in small, widely scattered caches, usually under 2 to 3 centimeters of soil or gravelly substrate. Nutcrackers retrieve these seed caches during times of food scarcity and to feed the young. Cache sites selected by nutcrackers are often favorable for germination of seeds and survival of seedlings. Those caches not retrieved by the time the snow melts contribute to forest regeneration. Consequently, whitebark pine often grows in clumps of several trees, originating from a single cache of 2 to 15 or more seeds. Douglas squirrels cut down and store whitebark pine cones in the middens. Grizzly bears and American black bears often raid squirrel middens for whitebark pine seeds, an important pre-hibernation food. Squirrels, northern flickers, and mountain bluebirds often nest in whitebark pines, and elk and blue grouse use whitebark pine communities as summer habitat. Threats: severe population decline in whitebark pine communities is attributed to blister rust, a recent outbreak of mountain pine beetle, fire suppression, forest succession, wildland fire, and climate change. A study in the mid-2000s showed that whitebark pine had declined by 41% in the Western Cascades due to 2 threats: white pine blister rust and mountain pine beetles. Whitebark deaths in North Cascades National Park doubled from 2006 to 2011. White pine blister rust. Many stands of Pinus albicaulis nearly range-wide are infected with white pine blister rust, a fungal disease that was introduced from Europe. In the northern Rocky Mountains of the U.S., whitebark pine mortality in some areas exceeds 90%, where the disease infests 143,000 acres. Cronartium rubicola occurs in whitebark pine to the northern limits of the species in the coastal ranges of British Columbia and the Canadian Rocky Mountains. The blister rust has also devastated the commercially valuable western white pine in these areas, and made serious inroads in limber pine populations as well. Nearly 80% of whitebark pines in Mount Rainier National Park are infected with blister rust. There is currently no way to stop the spread and effects of blister rust. However, a small number of trees in most populations harbor genetic resistance to blister rust. There have been some restoration efforts by the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and National Park Service in the northern Rocky Mountains. Restoration efforts involve harvesting cones from potentially unknown resistant whitebark pines, growing seedlings, and outplanting seedlings in suitable sites. In California, where the blister rust is far less severe, whitebark pine are still fairly common in the high Sierras. Mountain pine beetle. There are widespread outbreaks of mountain pine beetle in the western U.S. and Canada. Since 2000, the climate at high elevations has warmed enough for the beetles to reproduce within whitebark pine, often completing the life cycle within 1 year and enabling the populations to grow exponentially. Entire forest vistas, like that at Avalanche Ridge near Yellowstone National Park's East Gate, are expanses of dead gray-white barks. Scientists have attributed this recent warming trend to man-made global warming. In 2007, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service estimated that beetles had killed whitebark pines across 500,000 acres in the West, while in 2009, beetles were estimated to have killed trees on 800,000 acres, the most since record-keeping began. The pine beetle upsurge has killed nearly 750,000 whitebark pines in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem alone. Fire suppression has led to slow population declines over the last century by altering the health and composition dynamics of stands without the fire ecology, balancing the habitat and suppressing insect disease threats. In the absence of low-level wildfire cycles, whitebark pines in these stands are replaced by more shade-tolerant, fire-intolerant species such as subalpine fir and Engelmann spruce. In addition, senescent and blister rust-infected pine trees are not destroyed by natural periodic ground fires, further diminishing the whitebark pine forest's vitality and survival. Protective efforts. On July 18, 2011, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reported that the whitebark pine needed protection and that, without it, the tree would soon be extinct. However, the agency announced it would neither be able to list the tree as endangered nor protect the organism, as it lacked both the necessary staff and funding to do so. In June 2012, the Canadian federal government declared whitebark pine endangered in accordance with the Species at Risk Act. As such, it is the first federal endangered tree in Western Canada. In response to the ongoing decline of the tree throughout its range, the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation was formed. The mission is to raise awareness and promote conservation by sponsoring restoration projects, publishing a newsletter called Nutcracker Notes, and hosting an annual science and management workshop for anyone interested in whitebark pine. This U.S. group collaborates closely with the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation of Canada.